Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and with me today is Connor Exum, the author and host of Leon Trotsky's revolutionary newsletter and podcast. How are you doing today, Connor?
I'm doing well, Chris. Thanks for having me on the show again. It's always a pleasure to be here, and can't wait to talk about some police this time in the morning.
It's always a pleasure to have you on. I always enjoy our conversations, and we find some good rabbit holes usually.
I do too.
So, and yes, policing. So the other day, in fact, let me see if I can find it real quick. Sorry if I mutter to myself a moment, everyone.
I'm getting ready for my special season. I'm going into the mall Santa business.
Ah,
Hey, that way I can see the police in action where it really matters. Getting pickpockets and keeping the dying malls of America alive.
You gotta love it.
Yeah, that's right. Because after all, if they didn't keep commerce going, what would they do in most small towns?
That's a very good question, because it's really dependent on. Speaking of small towns, I was watching the other day and learned, just scrolling through YouTube, about a town in Texas which actually has more cops than it does people. The city council finally decided, not because of the cop to people ratio, but because of corruption, finally decided to fire the police chief and suspend the cops.
All of them?
Well, yeah, they've got the county sheriff in there running the police force right now.
Did they all fire? Did they all quit because they could no longer,
No, they did not all quit. They basically said, we're disbanding our police force and everybody's fired.
Oh wow, that's unusual. Usually what happens first is that they throw a tantrum and quit en masse, and then the town has to call the county. So I live in a town in New York that has, depending on who you want to believe at what time, how many people, but normally about 1,800 people. We got 4 cops and a 0 crime rate.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like Mulberry.
So here it is. It is in a very, very specific abolitionist publication called Inquest, and it's called Our Evidence-Based Obsession. And it is a piece on police reform by Jonathan Ben-Menachem. And it basically says that everything that has happened in the name of police reform for the last few years has been aimed at benefiting the carceral state.
Yeah, well, that sort of fits in line with that other article by Christopher Lewis and the other guy I can't remember right now, about why America's policing is not an over-policing problem, it's an under-policing problem.
Oh yeah, the Harvard guys.
Where they stated that the real crime was that for every 3 incarcerated people, there was only 1 cop on the street. And they thought that was way too low. But I mean, that seems about right. I mean, that seems even overkill.
And I guess that's really what I find interesting, because they seem to be basing their numbers on the ratio of cops to incarcerated people on European countries where the numbers of cops and incarcerated people are extremely low compared to the U.S. Remember, the U.S. imprisons more people than any other country in the world, even China. And China imprisons a whole lot of people for a whole lot of reasons.
That's true. And that's the point, right? So if you go with their numbers, right, and we have the most, that becomes a very large number of police we have out on the street.
It does. That ties into the town with more cops than it has people, too.
I mean, that seems to be their logic, is that at some point there has to be a cop going around every citizen going, don't do that.
a cop following people, one cop following every citizen around and being his shadow.
Don't do that one.
Now, in the town in Texas, what they were mostly what they were doing was writing traffic tickets and serving warrants for unpaid traffic tickets.
Wow, that sounds like a real racket right there.
It was, and a lot of the people who were serving warrants were work from home people down in Houston who were on the local cop payroll but never actually visited the town where they were cops. They were calling these people. Basically, their job was to do all the online paperwork to justify enforcing a warrant against somebody. And they were calling them warrant detectives.
Warrant detectives. They had their own category for them.
Yes.
That's I mean, it brings me back to the big question. Did this all start when we started to get heavily into the idea of the Broken Windows Project?
Well, I mean, it all seems to fit together that way. The under-policing story fits very much into the Rudy Giuliani, Michael Bloomberg school of policing. And that's the problem, is anything that involves more cops isn't going to make people safer.
No, but I mean, I'm reading this book. I'm almost finished with it. It's called When the Lights Went Out by David E. Nye, and it talks about the 1977 blackout in New York and how all the papers afterwards had this huge fear that all of a sudden, if there's a blackout or anything, there's going to be massive crime. And it was always under there. And it didn't matter whether it was in New York City or this small podunk town like I live in. As soon as the lights go out, right? And so that seems to be that overlying, anger, fear and anger they have.
These are the same people who feel like New York isn't safe, even though it's one of the safest big cities in the country.
That's right. But I'm just saying that it's always there. It's just underneath there. It's one little twinge, like the lights going out or the water not working, and then all of a sudden you're going to have pandemonium.
Fun fact. One of the highest crime rates in the country is in Bessemer City, Alabama.
That's right.
Now, you think about that for a moment. Do you ever see anybody on TV calling for more help for the police of Bessemer City, Alabama, like you do people taking political shots at Chicago?
Oh no. But that's because big cities, when you have more crime in big cities, you have greater advantage, you have a greater tax pool. Bessemer doesn't have the tax pool to afford it, so they just get stuck with it. You're not going to have a whole bunch of white liberals going, "Oh my God, they're going to steal my brand new Volvo."
Well, but that's the thing, is that local gentry are every bit as interested in control as well-off white liberals.
They are, but they're also more afraid of letting the white liberals in that are going to take away arrest their control from them, and then it's going to be some outside source.
They'll let the crime run wild. Dude, you have the highest crime rate in the country.
They downplay it, though.
Of course they do. And they'll pretend that it's not a problem because the majority of the criminals are white.
Well, that's another thing.
And the racialization of crime is something I've been noticing a lot lately. There's every time somebody talks about crime, there is a very strong racial edge to it.
Yeah, I was going to say that too, that it's amazing how even sources that are supposed to be progressive or against those kind of profiling type articles always say black man, Asian crime.
Yes.
It's never just, idiot shoots somebody. of any color, but it's it's
but you also never hear. But when it inevitably happens that the mass shooter is another white guy, you never hear people talk about white man blows away school.
well, yeah. I would say that only if they can link the white guy to a transgender group. then it's.
But then they'll say transgender guy and not
that's true.
So, because you really have to understand is that the idea that the media wants to portray is white people are normal and everything else is the deviation from the norm.
Well, that's true, and also that white people don't go around shooting people, and if it is, then that's kind of the normal, right? I mean, there's some kind of normal reasons why the white guy in Vegas shot up 100 people from his hotel.
And they never talk about the fact that a lot of the people in these mass shooting situations are radicalized right wingers.
That's true.
They don't want to talk about everybody ignores, even when they pretend to care about it. Everybody in the mainstream media ignores the real Nazi problem or describes it in ways that actually make it seem like some interesting phenomenon worthy of study and not a terrible threat.
Well, I mean, I think it's still worthy of study.
Definitely.
Yeah, but it's also a terrible threat. You can have both. Did you see the new Showtime series on the Branch Davidians?
I have not. I saw ads for it. I have not.
It's one of those shows where you watch it and you can't get the help but feel that there's a little sympathy more towards the Branch Davidians than you might want to see in this show.
Well, so that's been a problem for a long time. Libertarians have been defending the Branch Davidians and condemning the government overreach for years.
And there's no doubt the ATF screwed up all the way around.
So the ATF screwed up in lots of ways because the main thing was that they had many opportunities to arrest the specific people they wanted to arrest without it ever becoming a siege.
But they wanted a big show after Ruby Ridge.
A big show, yes.
And they wanted to look like heroes because they had the Ruby Ridge fiasco.
Yes. But it didn't work out that way.
No, it didn't. And I mean, there's a lot of things you could complain about the ATF, but this shows how these people are, persecuted by the government. And then if you watch the real people interviewed, they are not right in the head. 15, 20 years after this, they're still saying that they would have promoted David Koresh, and they would have, if they didn't shoot at the time, they certainly would have now if they had been in that situation again.
It's definitely there. Well, and the problem is there was a lot of sympathy leading up to what happened. There was too much sympathy for the Branch Davidians from the ATF too.
Yeah.
There at one point the ATF and members of the Branch Davidian group were shooting at the same target range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a lot of problems with that. But what I was getting at is that, in the media, we tend to show these radicalized groups as almost being sympathetic members if they're white.
Yeah. Well, but then if they're brown, then they're
evil. They're evil. They're terrorists. They're one step away from getting a nuclear bomb and blowing up Manhattan.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. There's here in Oregon, there was a Sikh group that basically built a huge community in one of the little towns out here and then got chased out.
Mm-hmm.
And it was true that the guy who started the community was kind of a weird cult leader, but if he'd been a white weird cult leader, he wouldn't have been chased out that way.
No, he wouldn't have been. I mean, look, Eamon Bundy takes over a whole, federal, tourist center in Oregon, and they let him walk out. and they treat him like a hero.
People still act sympathetic to the guy who started the gunfight with the cops and got killed.
That's right. And yet, at the same time, the protester in Oregon was chased down, hunted down by the marshals, and was shot in his garage. And he was shot at first.
His friend's garage. He was in Vancouver, Washington, with a friend.
Was he in a friend? I thought it was his, but yeah, that story. So I mean, and how do you justify that? I mean, you had one guy. He basically took hostages. He held up the store.
The way I look at it is pretty straightforward too. When you look at Michael Reinl and Kyle Rittenhouse side by side.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Reinl shot a Nazi to protect protesters, and he was murdered by the U.S. Marshals. Kyle Rittenhouse shot protesters so the cops wouldn't have to, and he's a big celebrity in right-wing circles.
Oh, yeah. Not even right-wing circles. In the faux left circles, he's become a huge celebrity.
Yes, the Jimmy Dore fans, the people who read Taibbi and listen to Glenn Greenwald's podcast.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on Rumble, I mean, he's like a hero.
It's one of the reasons I'm not on Rumble.
I'm not on Rumble because I don't think I want to give Peter Thiel any more money.
Well, exactly. Google
is bad enough.
Yeah, exactly. Google is bad enough. It's not like that brings up a fun topic, since we're talking about Rumble and YouTube and all, is that I did a media inquiry about getting Taylor Lorenz on the show to talk about her book, Extremely Online, and I got a copy of the book out of it, so it wasn't a total waste, and I've been reading that.
How good is it?
So it's really pretty good. It covers both the way that individual entrepreneurs really disrupted corporate America, but it also it's a story of how corporations win in the end, despite everything.
Yeah, and getting back to the police aspect of this, right? I mean, how much police? I mean, everyone's so afraid of the YouTube and Facebook and all that other stuff, saying, "Oh, there's cops everywhere. There's this, there's that." But I wonder really how much they are watching this, and if they are watching it, how sympathetic they are. I mean, over and over again, we see
what it comes down to is they're watching it based on what they think is a threat. Now, what they actually do about it seems to be greatly questionable. The degrees of surveillance that the Boston Marathon bomber was under before he blew up the marathon makes one wonder how he was able to blow up the marathon.
He wasn't too discreet in his online inquiries.
But and they had him under like 500 different kinds of surveillance, online and real life, and then he's not a threat, and pulled everything off.
Well, I mean, you could chalk that up to, I guess, sometimes you miss.
But this is the thing, is they don't care about actual terrorism. When we're talking about police agencies like this, the cops don't care about actual terrorism. Actual terrorism justifies cops in everybody's mind.
I was going to say that they almost have to let a few go through just so that they can say, look, if you had more of us, you wouldn't have that problem.
And that's something that you have to keep in your mind sometimes.
And that brings us to another interesting ancillary issue with the cops, right? I mean, and the big data issue, right? I mean, all the companies like Miner out of New York, which was founded by and VP'd. It wasn't founded, but VP'd by our brand new senator, House of Representatives, Patrick Ryan out of New York. He was the VP for several years of this company. You're telling me that these people are going to get more and more support out of the government now, that they have their inside guy who literally has ties to them, and then that's going to feed into the cops. Now the cops are going to have more digital access.
Hey, one of the companies one of the companies behind Cop City is one of the is like the last remaining vestige of Arthur Anderson. It's an Irish tech consulting company called Accenture.
Oh yeah.
It started out as Arthur Anderson Consulting before being spun off into an independent entity.
Well, it had to be because the Arthur Anderson got hit so hard after the Enron scandal.
Well, but that's the thing is they separated themselves from Arthur Anderson before.
That was the way they stashed all their cash from Arthur Anderson, because they never got as much as they should have out of them, because they had they took all those assets and put them in Ireland because they couldn't be touched.
Yes, and yes, Accenture is basically taking advantage of those corporate schemes. Get outside of the U.S. government's reach. Don't be an American corporation anymore.
Well, why would you be?
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. I mean, you can still set up your corporation in South Dakota and take all the tax breaks.
Yeah.
And then
you just tax dodges in Florida too.
Yeah, but I read that South Dakota's biggest business for the last 10 years has been setting up these phony corporations to tax dodge. And
it doesn't shock me. South Dakota is one of those places with a very low population ratio to land, and a very high, what's the way I'm looking for it? An unnaturally high percentage of wealthy people live there, given the population. It's the same for Montana and Wyoming. There are a lot of people who live there because they can afford to buy a lot of land.
Mm-hmm. And, when you see that happen, you usually see one other thing starts to creep up when you see states like that happen. You see the local municipalities get more and more police.
Yes, I believe that. That would definitely
almost always happens. You start to see the police numbers start shooting up because you got to protect these high wealth areas, right?
It's not even so much that you have to protect them; you have to make them feel safe.
That's the other,
because how much danger are they really in?
Oh, I don't know, but they're certainly. I mean,
let's be honest. There are no poor people besieging wealthy people's ranches in Wyoming and Montana. No, I don't believe the cops have ever been called out to prevent Elon Musk's South Dakota ranch from being stormed by an angry mob.
Does he own a South Dakota ranch?
I don't know. I'm just making up a rich person.
I know. I would choose Bill Gates because he owns farmland.
Yes, Bill Gates owns a whole lot of farmland in a whole lot of places. But Elon Musk just strikes me as more likely to live on the ranch sometimes than Bill Gates.
That doesn't mean that Bill Gates doesn't want it protected.
No, I'm just saying that Elon Musk seems more likely to actually spend time.
And then you have the other thing, the other ancillary to that, right? So even if they can't get the town to get them more cops, they create their own police that are then private security that have their own laws and then they usually get to lobby it so that they get powers that no private security should ever have, like the ability to arrest and actually confine you.
You know what a patrol special is?
No, I don't.
So San Francisco has this weird, archaic rule that anybody with the appropriate law enforcement experience and the willingness to do so can contract to provide police services to businesses inside the San Francisco city limits.
Oh God, that's got to be a throwback from the vigilante era.
But you have these patrol specials who are basically private cops who hire out to specific sets of businesses just to provide them with extra security and law enforcement, but they're technically cops. So they're
not cops
finding arrests.
But they're not.
Yeah, it's really weird. Yes, it's really weird.
So they don't have all that baggage of, you can't complain that they're racially profiling you because, they're not a police service. But wait, they are. They just threw me in county jail and it stuck.
Because that's the thing, is that they absolutely are cops in the legal sense, which is the scary part of things.
Yeah, that is scary. That I'd never heard of the police special.
Patrol special.
Patrol special. I've never heard of That term exactly.
It's a very weird thing, and I believe it's a leftover of the gold rush days when people were hiring their own.
It's got to be. It's got to be from that vigilante era, where the vigilante committee era, where they were lynching people literally at the courthouse. And well, what are you gonna do?
That's possible too.
They were. That was a crazy time in San Francisco's history, the 1850s.
Emperor Jones.
But getting back to these specialty police forces that they're creating, like Florida, Disney had their own. That was a real, when you went to the Disney parks, that was a real police department that was there. That was not, park security. You got caught shoplifting there. Those were real cops. They might be paid by Disney, but they were real police. They had all the authority. They weren't just going to put you in a little small room and wait for the real cops to come and pick you up. They were going to, take you off to a real jail cell. And that is a bizarre thing to have in a country.
I mean, what's really bizarre about this is this was all in a tabletop role-playing game from the 80s called Shadowrun, where they predict corporate cops and genocidal resource rushes. But they also have all sorts of weird magical phenomenon changing the world as we know it. And it runs into a mix of cyberpunk and fantasy.
That's a strange. I've never heard of that board game.
I know, tabletop role-playing game.
Oh, sorry, tabletop role-playing game. I don't know. I never played Dungeons and Dragons, I have to admit. I might have.
It's more fun than Dungeons and Dragons. It's got a.
Never fired up that 20-sided die and cast a spell.
When done right, Shadowrun has a very lethal weapony feel to it.
With goblins.
Yes, exactly.
Goblins. Hate goblins.
Elves, trolls, dwarves.
Didn't what's his name make a movie about that recently?
Will Smith made a movie with elves and orcs and such, where the orcs were very obviously intended to be analogs to racism towards black people. Really? But at the same time, and this is the part that was gross, they gave the people a justification for their bigotry. Oh, the orcs served the Dark Lord. They're bad. It's like, black people never served the Dark Lord. That was kind of a racist backhand there.
Yeah, well,
it's very Tolkien-y too in its treatment of, since they never name the villain, it's very easy to imagine this being a sort of continuation of Middle Earth, but into the real world,
or at least to a modern version of Middle Earth.
I can't remember the name of that movie. It was direct to Netflix.
Yeah,
it's actually not bad.
I saw 20 minutes of it once.
The racial politics were really weird,
and that's what I'm getting at. I mean, they portray them, the cop dramas. I mean, I think the most racist cop drama on television right now has to be Blue Bloods.
Oh, I've never watched Blue Bloods.
You've never watched? Well, if you watch it, it's a bunch of Irish white Catholics, which is terrible because I happen to be both Irish and Catholic. Not practicing, but I am. And it's just like every bad stereotype. Like they sit around a table like all the crime is in the city and they're gonna go clean it up. Like I'm like, God. I mean, and every criminal is always either black or brown. Usually, there's never like a white guy.
That's Joe Biden is all those Irish Catholic stereotypes, and he's president. So,
oh sure, but I'm just saying. I'm just saying that it's just like the worst show. I mean, that CBS has been making a killing with that show for years.
No, but the most fun thing about the Joe Biden campaign in 2020 was that Republicans couldn't make a big scare tactic out of him being Catholic the way they did with JFK, because all their favorite Supreme Court justices are Catholic too.
That's true. It's a sixth. I mean, Roberts, Kavanaugh,
all the Nazis on the court except Gorsuch are openly Catholic. Gorsuch was raised Catholic,
Are you
and
sure?
was a practicing Catholic until he went to England and met his wife, who is an Anglican, and now he attends his wife's Episcopal church in the U.S., but he's not a member of his wife's church. So, and I never thought I would be saying this in the 21st century, it raises the question of whether Neil Gorsuch is a crypto-Catholic.
A crypto-Catholic. Well, you and the great you and what's his name, Cromwell, could go search that one out if he's a crypto-Catholic.
It's just, I mean, who thought we would be? It makes you feel like an English Whig from the 17th century.
That's right.
But these are the times we live in.
And you know, I have to say this, but Catholics are not exactly showing themselves off to be too discreet in their Nazism or their white supremacists or any of it. I mean, we got all of them. You know, we got even the black Catholic wants to get rid of interracial marriage.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's like, Clarence, you understand your wife is white, right? And you're not.
It's like, God.
I guess he figures it won't ever happen in any of the places he lives, so it doesn't matter. If it doesn't affect his marriage, then it doesn't matter.
I'm pretty sure the first places where racism like that shows up is always in the upper class.
Of course, but I don't think he believes, and this could be naive of him. I'm not saying he's right. I don't think he believes that the District of Columbia or Virginia or Maryland are going to ban interracial marriage anytime soon, which, considering that the precedent that allowed racial marriage is Loving versus Virginia, I'm not sure he's right.
Neither am I. And I'm thinking that the first group of people that would love to see people not the same skin color as them out of the club are the wealthy ones who don't like to share wealth with the people that don't look like themselves, act like themselves, sound like themselves.
Well, but that's the thing, is that, you know, Clarence Thomas does do all those things. He's adapted very well.
Except for the one big thing that you never get around.
Yes, that is true. But I believe that he believes that they really are all homogenous together because they're right-wing religious nuts.
They might be for a while.
I have characterized Nazism before as all the parts of Christianity that both Catholics and Protestants agree on.
Pretty much is. I mean, you could find all those people. Cromwell could definitely be in there.
Well, Cromwell was very aggressively anti-Catholic, to give him some credit. But, well, at the time, the Catholic Church, the politics of the Pope actually mattered to some degree.
But I think he would have agreed nicely with everything else.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's the real thing. Cromwell banned playing cards and going to the theater. I mean, they banned going to the theater in the land of Shakespeare.
Church bells.
Yep.
John Bunyan, the author of Pilgrim's Progress, was put in jail for like a year because he enjoyed doing the church bells too much.
Yeah, and which is hilarious because John Bunyan was a Puritan.
That's right. But apparently he got too much joy out of those bells.
Well, you know the story of Marymount in Massachusetts, don't you?
No, I don't know that story.
Oh, this is the only genocidal annihilation of a British colony in the Americas that I actually know of that happened, and it was done by the Plymouth Rock Pilgrims.
Okay, now I know the story you're talking about.
This group, the second group, came and joined the original Mayflower colonists and set up their own town that was unofficially called Marymount. And it really, really aggravated the original Puritan colonists when the mayor of the town put up a maypole.
That's right.
And they used the excuse of the maypole to attack the town.
Now I know the story you're talking about. I didn't think of it. I was thinking, but yeah, that's a crazy story.
The Pilgrims,
I know,
are the people who committed the Pilgrims are the only people who have ever committed white genocide in North America.
But the maypole was just going too far. It was just too much enjoyment of a pagan symbol.
Yes. Well, that was the excuse. It was really about the fact that it was cutting into their business, and they were making less money.
They had no choice.
It's a great excuse. But again, the real reason it was cutting into their business, they were, on top of everything else, a business that was supposed to make money.
Oh yeah, all of our colonies were. That's why we're the perfect capitalist nation. We're founded by small businesses. By
religious nuts who wanted to start businesses.
It sounds just like it. That could be a parody in itself.
It could. But the thing is, the Pilgrims were religious nuts and entrepreneurs, just like the people at the Classics Learning Test.
Which leads us right back, who love cops.
They do.
Because if you're going to be a religious nut, you got to enforce all your crazy religious rules. You got to impose that on everyone, and then that means more cops. And then you get the Salem witch hunts.
But it brings up another question. Does Erica Donalds understand that her husband is black?
Only so far as she needs him right now.
Well, but it's this these marriages that are, I mean, you understand you're breaking your own side's rules.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't. They don't seem to think about that, and they don't seem to think about the danger that is actually inviting.
No, they don't. Nor do they seem to understand where that goes when they get into it. Right? I mean, they go down this rabbit hole, and they stir up all these people that are racists, give them plenty of fuel and support. And then they're always surprised, like, well, why are you burning a cross on my door? I supported you. Well, but you have a black husband, and that's all they need to know.
Well, exactly. It's like the Association of German National Jews was in coalition with the Nazi Party before Hitler's appointment as chancellor, and stayed in coalition with the Nazi Party for a surprisingly long time. But that did not stop members of the Association of German National Jews from being sent to camps if Hitler wanted to steal their money.
No, never does. It never does. You can't make peace with them. Just like body cams are never going to stop police from shooting others if they don't have, until you get rid of qualified immunity.
Well, and this idea that somehow more training will make cops better. You understand that cops are trained to see people as threats and to act with extreme. The only thing I can call it is a culture of institutional fear. Cops are supposed to be afraid all the time.
True. I mean, I have a niece who married a cop, and he's talking about, well, I want to make sure she's got a guard dog and all this other stuff because she won't be safe because I'm a cop now. I'm like, why? No one's going to come to your house. No one's going to shoot you. You're a beat cop. The only people that are going to shoot you are your own buddies because that you stumble onto them doing some criminal activity. And if you don't join them, you either join them or get shot. So I wouldn't worry about.
That's exactly right. I mean, that still goes back to the story of Frank Serpico.
Yeah,
who did not report his colleagues to his boss for taking dirty money because his boss was taking dirty money too. It wouldn't have made a difference. Everyone in the precinct was taking money from the pad. That was the reason the pad existed. So he wasn't going to report his colleagues for taking dirty money because his boss was taking dirty money too. What he was going to do is when the harassment became intolerable, he was going to report his colleagues for harassing him. Now, this is the point where where you actually have to give his boss a certain amount of credit, because his boss chose to side with Serpico despite the fact that he was taking money from the pad too, and ended up testifying in front of the commission and lost his career as well as a result, which isn't as well known. But Serpico was shot in the face for this.
That's right. And that was always the funny thing is that the movie makes it out like he's going to talk about the dirty money, but that wasn't really the case.
Well, everybody knew about the dirty money,
Right?
except the public. The public found out about the dirty money because of Serpico.
And they only found out about the dirty money because they had to explain why he was being harassed.
Exactly. And this is where you have to give Dave Dirks credit, because he testified.
Yes, we are taking dirty money.
He testified that we are taking dirty money. We've been taking dirty money for years. Every cop in the city of New York takes dirty money. This is the way it works. And he was really clear about that. Mm-hmm. And again, he lost his career too. And he was the one who actually testified about the dirty money.
Yes.
Because that was the reason for Serpico's harassment.
Mm-hmm. But that's what I was saying. I mean, until you get to that factor, right? Until you clean all of that out, no amount of body cams, no amount of training, it has to be the right kind of training. But if you just train them to be paranoid, it's not going to work. I mean, they're not going to be better. They're just going to be better killers.
And that's really, but then they also have the excuse all the time. Well, I was afraid for my life.
Well, that's got to we have to kind of put a stop to that. I mean, how can you really be afraid for your life? A 12-year-old, afraid for my life. A 98-year-old, afraid for my life.
They're trained to be afraid for their life all the time. It's a culture of institutional fear.
From a man in a walker?
That's the thing, is that the cops kill a disproportionate number of disabled people. They know they kill a disproportionate number of disabled people. They know they have a legitimate reason to think disabled people might want to get back at them.
I guess that's a vicious circle then.
It is. And it justifies all the police violence. The black people don't like us because they commit crimes and we shoot them. And that's why we shoot them.
Yeah, well, and getting back to the Cop City thing, I'm still puzzled exactly what does it provide? I mean, what training are they providing?
So here's the thing, and this is what nobody wants to talk about. The Cop City thing is about having an urban warfare center in one of the cities where the George Floyd riots were the biggest deal. Because remember, there were people protesting outside CNN.
Mm-hmm. They broke into CNN. They crushed CNN's lobby.
Yes. So with all that publicity, the Republicans really want that urban warfare center, and the Democrats. This is the fun part: the Democrats, because of the way government in these southern states works, the Democrats who run the city have to give the state Republicans what they want.
But that's maybe what we should start calling it. Instead of calling it Cop City, let's call it what it is: commando training. Urban warfare, special ops these aren't cops. These are special operators.
And we're not just going to be training our cops. We're going to be training Israeli cops and South African cops and British cops.
These are cops that these aren't cops that come and arrest you. These are cops that come and kill you.
Yes, exactly.
And we have to make that distinction that these are the guys that, when they break open the door, someone's getting shot.
Yeah. Black Hawk helicopters.
Well,
what are Black Hawk helicopters used for? Black Hawk helicopters are used to take people out of live fire or put them into live fire.
I mean, they're definitely designed to insert special operations teams.
Yes.
I don't even know where you'd use one in a neighborhood. I mean, you can't land it. Its rotor's too big.
You don't. Well, that's the thing.
Are they going to rappel down onto your roof?
You need to land. You just need to come down low to a rooftop.
Rappel down. I mean, what are you gonna do? It seems like such a ridiculous purchase.
Well, you could also, one of the things that Blackhawks often have when they're used for these things is gun turrets. Maybe they're going to have gun turrets.
That brings up Blue Thunder.
Yeah.
Now I got Rob Schneider's. Now I got Schneider.
Roy Scheider.
Roy Schneider.
That was so cruel, calling Roy Scheider Rob Schneider.
I know, that was. It was 2 R's. Definitely that was great. But they can be armed. But I don't really see too much use.
So that's the thing. Is like the only reason for that is you think that there's going to be fighting in an open space where you can land reinforcements or get cops out fast.
right? I mean, you can rappel down, you can do all this stuff, but I mean, it's bonkers to think that you're going to, you know, put people in like this, like to go like serve a warrant for somebody who's like, you know, 30 days late on their on their palimony, and you're going to go what, drop in like six guys, and well, we got him. He gave up a little resistance, but a squirt from the minigun on the chopper really.
What worries me is, number one, the primary reason for this site is to tamp down protests.
Sure.
So basically, what worries me is after it's built, what happens the next time there's a protest in Atlanta?
Oh well, you see what happens. You'll see what happens. They'll roll out their used armored vehicles from
and their surplus Blackhawks.
Mm-hmm. And they'll have more riot police than you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're right. I mean, it's like the sort of like the what the Normans did when they conquered England. You know, you put a fort right in the middle of some place that's going to give you trouble, and you make sure you know everyone knows it's got a division of troops in it, and at any moment they can just pop out, and then next you're done. And you're saying that Baltimore wants one now.
Baltimore wants one. Newark, New Jersey wants one. And
the
mayor of Newark is supposed to be a big-time progressive, too, which is what's so disturbing about it.
But if Newark wants one, right, aren't they going to have to displace all the chemical companies that have been polluting there for 50 years and find out what the hell's in the water?
I don't think that's what Cop City's for.
Maybe Cop City's to make sure that no one ever goes down and digs into the soil.
What's scary is there were little towns in Ohio, not even Cleveland or Cincinnati, but like the next step down. So like Akron and Lima
I've just been through Akron. It's a beautiful town. No, it's not.
But I mean, so you places like Akron and Lima want a Cop City. It's disturbing.
Probably Binghamton, New York will get one. We got plenty of land out there, and it'll be a perfect spot. You stick it right there, you know. You make sure you keep all that hotbed of college students down. Don't let them rise up out of Cortland and Binghamton, and you know, I don't even understand why we need these. I mean, our cops are way over militarized as it is.
It's because the wealthy are scared.
Well, they should be scared.
And that's why we see this constant showing of the fascist teeth of the American state.
Didn't John Ossoff just come out in favor of Cop City?
John Ossoff has been in favor of Cop City from the beginning.
I didn't know from the beginning, but
Raphael Warnock was also for it at the beginning, but has now come out as really wishy-washy.
Oh, he's one of those. Let's let the people have a vote.
Let's let the people have a vote, but I also support the police. And is there anything sadder than the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church supporting the police?
No, it isn't. Considering how they would gladly let him get blown up and do a shoddy investigation, can't figure it out.
Can you imagine being the pastor of Martin Luther King's church and saying I support the police?
Oh no, I can't. But I'm just saying that in general, that just with the police, they're just like, well, that it's a real head scratcher why you got blown up. Because they're not going to investigate that. They're not going to look at it. They're not going to touch it if anything happens there. You know.
Oh.
You have to have.
Yes. Columbus does have an insane amount of cops.
Columbus.
And the reason Columbus has an insane amount of cops is because Columbus is now the biggest city in Ohio.
Is it?
Yes. Columbus now has more people than Cincinnati and Cleveland.
Because
people have been moving out of Cincinnati and Cleveland into Columbus.
Oh. Well, I didn't know that. Thanks for telling us that, Ethan.
But all that growth, we've got these people coming in. We need more cops.
Well, that's the other thing they always tell us, right? We always need more cops because there's all these immigrants coming in. That's always the other reason why. We saw a whole I saw a whole program about that with the glorious guy. What was his name? He calls himself Pasta. Oh God.
Craig Jardula.
Craig Jardula, Pasta. Craig Pasta Jardula. I always remember the pasta part. I mean, he started to spout off a little bit of Trump mania, like they're sending their worst to us about the southern border.
Seriously, really? Yeah. I don't know how anybody still takes him seriously. The only thing that I can think of is that people just really are that. People who think that they are somehow progressive really are that close to joining the Nazis.
Sure.
It's just scary, though. I mean,
it is. It is scary because they've
taken over a significant portion of what used to be called left Twitter, and that doesn't matter if you're not an extremely online person, of course, but it completely colors people's use of Twitter.
Yeah, I think it does matter, even if you're not, because I think the less informed you are, and the more you watch and if you pick these people up just once in a while, right, and they're all with the other people you like, it doesn't seem as well, I might have missed something, so I really don't know what he's talking about, but I'm still going to follow him, and I'm still going to be that kind of supporter, because you're not really watching it as carefully, but so you're just kind of going along with the flow.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of people who are like, prove he said that. Well,
yeah, right.
You're claiming you watched the show. You know what he said.
And then sooner or later you pop up and you find out that you're still agreeing with the guy, and he's, basically supporting, Trump's light policies with Kim Iverson saying, well, we shouldn't have an open border, but we should let them in to work at our low-paying jobs. I'm like, oh, great. Now you sound like Hillary Clinton in 1996, right? A fence, but we can let the ones in that can do the low-paying jobs, and we can lock the other ones out.
That's always been the U.S. border policy. Hillary Clinton.
Oh, sure. It's been the policy for all immigrants.
As long as there's been a border. Now, mind you, before World War II, there was an open border, but there was still a lot of awful things happening on the U.S. side of it. The Texas Rangers were not actually founded to fight the indigenous people. They were founded to kill people on the Mexican border.
That's right. Well, that and runaway slaves.
That too.
That was like their two big jobs. Keep the Mexicans out. Make sure the slaves don't cross the border, because then you can't get them back.
The famous gunslinger John Wesley Hardin, Rock Hudson played him in the movie. He started killing people because his father was an ex-Confederate, and he was really racist, and he was tremendously offended that the Texas Rangers had been replaced by a mostly black state police unit. And so his first famous killings were all black cops.
Well, that's, it's true. I mean, although I find it amusing that now they're going to have a show about, what's his name? Oh, Bass. He was a real
Sam Bass?
The marshal, who was like the most successful marshal of all time. Black guy. Oh, I can't think of his name. Last name was Bass. And they're going to have it, right? And it's on CBS, right? It's done by Taylor Sheridan, so it's not going to be accurate at all. So it's like just he read like the one-page synopsis of the guy's history. He was like, "Yep, that's it. I got it. I'm good. I'm going to go off now and do what I want." Like, because he only shot like 3 people, so like he's going to shoot like 80 people in the first 6 minutes of the movie.
Well, it's like the Last Capone, the Lost Capone, which shows. Police Chief Jimmy Capone heroically fighting against Al Pacino's gang. That's not exactly how it worked, and that wasn't the reason that James Capone became a police chief in a little town.
He's gotten in trouble with all the capos and had to hide out. And plus, he was running like all the crime in the town as the police chief.
Yes.
But
the people who made the movie The Lost Capone decided, let's make him an Elliot Ness style hero just for fun.
He wasn't.
No.
And they know he was bootlegging with his brother.
Yes. But it's just such a good story that they pretend.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's what happens, right? And that's what's going to happen with this cop city, right? They're gonna portray it as being a center to train cops that are just going to, help little old ladies and cats out of trees.
We're training those cops to help the little old ladies across the street and protect your life and livelihood.
Of course, to do that, they need an M16 that's fully
and
automatic.
Of course, it's a lie because the courts have ruled that cops have no duty to protect our lives and livelihood.
Which seems to defeat the whole purpose of a cop. I mean, well, then
doesn't it?
Then what are they here to do? I mean, if they're not here to protect us or serve us, what
are they doing?
Are you protecting yourself? Is that what you're doing? And if so, why are you a cop? You can do that.
Well, your namesake had an opinion on what the cops were.
Oh yeah, I know.
Were for Leon Trotsky.
Yeah, supporting the bourgeoisie to keep the working class down.
Yep,
and that's true.
And that's he was very specific in his statement that a member of the working class who becomes a policeman is no longer a worker but a bourgeois cop.
And I disagree with him a little on that topic because there was one point where cops really were working class.
So yes and no.
Like back in 1850, when they used.
So this is where it's really important. It's really important to understand the history of police corruption in America.
Yes, it is.
Cops. The Broadway squad in New York, which was the elite Prohibition era head-breaking thugs, were recruited from the Irish 5 Points gang.
Yeah, they're totally correct.
And were still in business. They didn't shut down their business because they became cops. They were still in the organized crime business in their own neighborhoods.
Well, I was talking more about the early police strikes because of the low pay, totally being exploited.
Yes, but even then, when did those striking cops ever show any solidarity with others?
They never did. Actually, that's not totally true. There was a point where some of the police unions actually did become part of the Knights of Labor.
Now that's interesting because the Knights of Labor were actually a seriously left-wing organization.
They were, but here's what happened. Here's the thing: when they got their contracts finally, right, they had to give up the Knights of Labor and the AFL, and they had to create their own separate entities as unions. Otherwise, they couldn't get a deal. And once they did that, that's when the divide became. That's when they no longer were with the police, with the workers. And it only happened in a couple of small areas where they actually became part of the Knights of Labor. But the town fathers were so irate.
Even in the right around the turn of the century in Wyoming, the man who led the gunslingers who were trying to run all the homesteaders out of Wyoming for the big ranchers was an ex-federal marshal.
That's right. You're talking about the 1890 range wars.
The Johnson County War.
Terrible movie they made of it with what's his name?
So it's not that the movie is... So what's funny about that movie is that what people didn't like about it was that it portrayed these cowboys as Harvard graduates and these fancy Dans, and they just hated that. But the funny fact is that at the time, the majority of landowners were absentee owners of these huge ranches run by foremen and lived in New York City or Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia.
You're talking about a different the other movie. I'm talking
about the movie about the Johnson County War that everybody hates so much and that ruined
the United Artists. That's
ruined Michael
Carmino.
Ruined the career of the guy who wrote and directed The Deer Hunter.
That's Michael Carmino.
Yes, Michael Cimino.
and what's his name? Yeah, but that's all true.
Evans,
the guy actually did have a Harvard degree.
But that's the whole thing, is that the people who owned the ranches in Wyoming were these absentee owners who hobnobbed with the rich on Long Island and in the Beltway. But they didn't. The part that movie got wrong is they didn't actually visit Wyoming that much.
No, but that sheriff did go to Wyoming, and he really was a Harvard grad, and he really was there.
Oh, sure.
That was all true. The owners never went there. They all had the hired help. But
Chris Christopherson and was it Malcolm McDowell?
Yes.
I can't remember him. Chris Christopherson,
John
and
Hurt.
Malcolm McDowell character.
John Hurt.
John Hurt. Thank you. The Chris Christopherson and John Hurt characters were guys who owned their ranches and never visited Wyoming in real life.
No. What I was getting at is the other Johnson County War movie, the much cheaper one with Tom Berenger and Luke Perry, made in like the late night.
I don't think I've ever seen that.
Oh, it's just a terrible movie. That's just. The only thing it gets right is that they shot up a lot of people, and mostly poor ranchers that were
poor homesteaders who
right, because they were trying to get rid of the open range. No.
Yeah, no, they shot up a sex worker's place and hung her.
Yeah, and
then released a fake story about her being a notorious rustler in the local newspaper.
They have that story. They play that character's played by Rachel Ward. That's one of the true. That's like the only true element in this one version of it. Yeah, where they shoot her up. I mean, yeah, but the Johnson Wars. But I mean, that's all. But that's what this Cop City's for. I mean, that's really what it is. It's a whole new version of that.
But this was the forces of the truly wealthy rising up to smash the threat from the petty bourgeois in their whose land ownership might bring democracy to Wyoming.
Yeah, and the open range, and they wanted to close the range off.
And
completely.
Wyoming to this day has the smallest population in the country because of things like the Johnson County War. And
the fact that they've also been
because the ranchers won.
Oh yeah,
the Johnson County War.
The big ranchers won. Yes.
The big ranchers won. They successfully got the people who they had tried to murder put up on federal charges after the U.S. Army saved the gunfighters from the angry mob.
That is true. But what I was getting at,
you don't hear enough about the fact that the angry mob of small ranchers kicked the ass of the hired guns, and the U.S. Army had to save their butts.
Yeah, but you have to also remember that probably most of those angry mob were also former Confederate or Yankee soldiers.
I mean, I'm not saying. I'm not saying they were good people. I'm just saying they were like a well-trained militia.
But
this was the thing where this was the rage of the upper class. Against the middle class, not even workers, against the middle class, who they saw, whose land they saw as bringing democracy and fences to their perfect open range hideaway.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And also the railroad interest was a big thing.
Railroad interest because they
didn't want any of that land to be out of their purview, because every time, I mean, that's the only way the railroad made any money was when it bought up all the land and then sold it off, and they sold it off to the railroad at prices that are amazing. I mean, even back in the 1870s, there were economists asking questions like, why is this land going for $200 an acre?
Knowing the railroad is going to buy up all the land when the railroad goes through is the whole premise of Blazing Saddles.
It's true. It's also the whole Credit Mobilier scam. Know where it is, pretend you're building more railroad at lower price, then go back to Congress and cry that there's all these unforeseen things like Native Americans that are killing you, and you have to get more money, and then go sell more land off to your friends.
You didn't foresee that if you ran the buffalo away, the locals would get pissed?
Well, it worked in Blazing Saddles. No, but I mean, again, this is Cop City, right? I mean, and the question becomes, the Cop City is the same kind of thing as the. So first you go after the workers, and then you find out that They're not really the big problem. The big problem are the middle class people who have enough political power and political money to really thwart you, and that's who you got to get rid of.
But then the trouble is that the middle class all too often sees their interests as aligned with the big owners.
Well, they do, but there's always a divide, right? I mean, when they no longer can buy property, and
the way Trotsky put it is, the petty bourgeois are reliable enough that they'll join us when they know we're going to win.
Mm-hmm. I mean, well, that's because he studied the 1848 revolution pretty successfully. But I was saying that they know that Cop City is good for them, right? Because they're thinking, well, I own a whole bunch of subways, so they got a whole bunch of cops. Maybe I can get a franchise down inside of Cop City. Revolution
and Counter-Revolution, the pamphlet by Marx about the 1848 revolutions is still one of the best analyses of that whole.
Oh, I think so too.
Series of events, and Trotsky read that. Yes,
he did. But what I was getting at is that these guys are stupid enough to think that they're going to get like a franchise down there with their subway.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, don't put a cafeteria in. We'll have a food court.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And and you can I'll just have another franchise for my Subway or my McDonald's, and then they don't realize that really they've lost it all, and this Cop City is really to watch you because you're the one that they hate even more than the working class.
They got to steal that money back from you,
and they'll give it back to them stupidly,
I'm having a hard time not being pessimistic lately because I've been saying for a while, I see it getting worse before it gets better.
Well, I don't think that's really pessimistic. I think it's just realistic. I mean, history always seems to go worse before better.
There's no serious revolutionary movement.
Well, that's true. And once again, we can blame that on the fact that everyone wants to call anybody that disagrees with them either a Fed or a CIA agent.
Well, I mean, that's the online stuff. I'm thinking more of stuff with real world parallels.
Well,
one of the things that the LaRoucheites did back before the internet was go to Communist Party and Socialist Workers Party rallies and beat people up with nunchucks.
Which aren't even Chinese weapons.
I know. They're Japanese.
But I mean, they aren't even made real.
Got one, actually.
From what I understood, weren't they made for one of the movies because Bruce Lee wanted to do something cool with something?
No. They are part of a set of traditional Okinawan weapons that evolved from farm implements after the Japanese conquest of the Ryukyu Kingdom that ruled Okinawa before the Japanese took over. And one of the things they did was they banned the ownership of weapons, so people made all their weapons out of farm implements.
Well, you always do that. Yeah, that's going to be, I mean, and that's the funny thing about like these hardcore Republicans, right? Who don't want to pay for Cop City, don't want cops to touch their guns, but then oddly want to have cops with like attack helicopters for some odd reason.
The simple fact is that Republicans only have a problem with cops when cops arrest them.
True.
Republicans will support the cops without fail, as long as the cops aren't in their way when they want to storm the Capitol.
That's true, and that's an interesting situation there. The whole Capitol storming.
Well, cops let some of the people in the first place, and everyone seems to have forgotten that in their race to make the Capitol cops heroes.
There was definitely that, but I mean, the suicides didn't happen the way they said they did. They didn't happen. I mean, no one was hit with a fire extinguisher. I mean, not that I'm saying there wasn't a riot. There was definitely a riot, and there was definitely something bad going on. But where did the cops fit
remember,
into it?
they showed they showed imagery that you would normally associate with police brutality, but with the cops as the victims.
I know, that was it, yeah.
And when you think about that, and the way the media coverage of the Capitol, of the storming of the Capitol after the fact, used all this imagery to make the cops the heroes of the whole thing in order to defang the whole defund the police movement.
I mean, I would have definitely said that there was bad things on both. Something happened. There was a breakdown. Yeah. Some of these cops clearly were sympathetic to the ones on the outside.
But then you also had the people on the outside who were like, "We didn't expect the cops to shoot rubber bullets at us. We were there. We were doing this for them."
I know that. I don't know. They were supposed to join us. I mean, but that's clearly what they were told. Some of these people were clearly told by their leaders that don't worry, when we get to the doors, they're going to open up. Now, why would you say that unless you didn't have some inclination?
So remember all these stories that they were running when Trump was president about how law enforcement had been infiltrated by white supremacists?
I know. They've all disappeared.
But the problem is that it's not that law enforcement has been infiltrated by white supremacists. It's the fact that white supremacists are the traditional recruiting ground of law enforcement.
That's true.
All the way back to slave patrols.
Yeah. And, and they've always played racist. That's why they chose Irish cops, because they knew Irish cops in New York City were going to be more likely to beat up other minorities.
Well, they knew they could trust the Irish cops to beat up the Italians and the Jews.
And the Poles.
But the biggest thing was, biggest thing specifically was they wanted to take advantage of the Irish, Italian, Jewish criminal tensions by making the Irish criminals cops.
True. And they also knew that, and the other thing was that later on, when the Jews got really heavily into the socialist movement, they knew the Irish, who weren't as heavy in that, were going to see that as a direct threat against their own, corrupt little businesses, and
then they take advantage of these ethnic
divides,
to use this against people.
So that's why they chose Irish cops. I mean, it wasn't a mistake. They knew they first pitted them against them in the 1880s.
The Irish mob becoming cops is why the Irish gangsters were pretty much cut out of the National Organized Crime Commission
That's right.
When the mafia formed it, and when Meyer Lansky and Charlie Luciano got the big Jewish mobs and the big Italian mobs together, the only Irish mobster who was let into the club was Oni Madden, and almost all the other Irish mobsters were classified as cops by the National Syndicate.
Which makes you wonder why anyone ever trusted Whitey Bulger. It just makes you wonder, right? I mean, with that kind of history going on, and the fact that he seemed to slip out of way too many crimes in Boston.
Boston is a weird animal. The Boston is the one place where the Irish gangsters sort of clung on.
Well, they did, because the Italians got to be the cops in Ireland. In there, they chose the Italians to be the cops, and the Italian mob shrunk and the Irish mob grew, and they went after each other. But again, same reason. The Italians hated. That was their city to go knock heads with the Irish.
And it's just all ugly. And the history behind policing is ugly. And that's why policing keeps being ugly when we
want to know. Now, here's a fun little fact. Did you know that as early as 1877, the Colt Company was manufacturing Gatling guns that were sold to police departments? That was one of their selling points.
Believe it. They were using Gatling guns against striking workers quite a lot in the Midwest and West.
I know, but I'm just saying that so early on, we think this is a new phenomenon that the cops are going to get more that they're going to militarize the cops.
Mm-hmm. The Battle of Ludlow is another situation where this time the actual mine workers put together a paramilitary force that kicked the ass of the paramilitary force that worked for the mine owners, and the U.S. Army had to save the rich guys' hired guns.
Yep, that's when they sent in the National Guard in 1914 and killed 200 people.
Yeah, that was later in
Colorado,
Virginia. Oh yeah, Colorado. You're right. Oh, that is 1914. I was thinking of Blair Mountain.
That's what they called out the Air Force. They literally dropped bombs.
Yeah,
on them on the redneck army, as it was called, because they wore kerchiefs that were red, so they could identify themselves. So I mean, what we're getting at is that this police military confluence in America goes all the way back, and it goes all the way back through time. I mean, if you think about it, the first real police forces have always been some kind of standing army, even in ancient times. They patrolled the walls. So
the first modern police force in the world was the Metropolitan Police Department
in Britain,
Scotland Yard.
That's right, but I'm just saying. But the idea of some kind of military police has got
definitely. Well, that was why they wanted the police to be regimented and professional like the military, because the reason they were creating a police force was because the merchants of London were tired of the thief takers, because the thief takers were also the fences.
That's right. And they only gave up the people that didn't have that tried to give them poor quality stuff or didn't pay on the stuff that they bought.
And that's what the most famous thief in London, Jack Wilde, and the thief taker who captured him, both ended up being hung.
I mean, there's so many problems. But again, they made the police force because even though they increased the number of crimes that you could be hanged for, had gone up like exponentially, they were still having theft. You couldn't go out of the city limits, and they were like,
cops don't actually have much effect on crime.
No, they don't. I mean, what has effect on crime is, social changes, economic changes.
You have to have a world where people are less alienated and want less vice if you actually want to do anything about vice.
Well, I don't know.
And I'm not even saying vice is a bad thing, but vice is popular because the working class is alienated.
Well, yeah, you have to have when you're alienated, you're looking for something to find meaning in.
Something to feel something.
And, we have too many jobs that don't do anything, that seem to have absolutely no purpose other than to move paper from point A to point B or shift emails from one user to another.
It's true.
We've got too many people that have no hope of ever getting a good job.
Well, that's really the worst part of it, is we have too many people that have no hope of ever getting a good job.
We've got too many grifters online that people are paying $5 and $10 to go live vicariously through because they're like supposedly living outdoors or some other.
And those are the people who the corporations choose to route their dollars to.
That's right. So, I mean, everyone knows it's a big scam for the most part.
That's what the book Extremely Online is about. Is, again, it's about the corporate co-optation of what entrepreneurs were trying to do to make the internet work for them.
Well, I mean, the whole wired concept of the long tail internet provider, it's nonsense. It doesn't matter. To make it really work, what you're looking for is exploitation of your of the customer, and you have to create a sycophantic fan base, not just a fan base, but a fan base that wants to like watch everything you say for 2 hours or 3 hours, and to me that is a bizarre.
Well, idea. I mean, I do say I hope some people watch us for 2 hours.
Well, yeah, I do.
It's a whole different thing.
I do, but I mean, but you should also be be willing enough to know that you need that feedback and say, when someone says, well, I didn't like this part of what you said.
Yes.
Okay. And you need that. And you should say, okay, well, let's talk it out. Let's see what goes on. But that's not what these influencers do. They have, fans that, oh, he said everything for 2 hours and every word he said was pure gold. And that's just nonsense. I don't say pure gold. I don't say pure gold for 2 hours. You won't. No one will. Jimmy Dore sure as hell doesn't say it for 15 seconds.
Well, but then you have the people who think Jimmy Dore and Russell Brand are the only people in the world telling them the truth.
But that's it. That's that sycophantic problem I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might get some things very right, and you might not agree with me on other things. Just tell me. Write it on a blog. Answer back when I question you about it.
Yeah, that's true.
That's what we have to do. I mean, that's the only way we're gonna. In some ways, you have to have that Socratic method where you ask questions, answer them, a dialogue,
yes.
And that's where we're losing it. And that's where there's no dialogue in the police system. It doesn't want that. It's authoritarian. It's hammered down, and no one is going to solve these crime problems with their methods.
It's true.
I mean, why aren't we doing more community policing? Why aren't we looking, not everyone has to go to jail,
That's the biggest thing. I mean, you have to remember that even people talk about private prisons all the time, but you have to remember that even public prisons are in business now.
Oh yeah. Well, that's because they've been forced to be in business.
Yes. You even, public prisons have work programs where corporations come in and pay prisoners sub-minimum wage to do stuff for them. Heck, there were prisoners working on the Bloomberg campaign.
Oh, I have a lot of experience, not so much with the adult prisons. I've done a few in my former career, but with the children facilities in New York, OFCS runs. Which is ironic, right? The Office of Children and Family Services runs detention centers. I mean, that does not sound right. That sounds like your perfect authoritarian kind of.
There was the big scandal in Pennsylvania when it turned out that the company that was contracting to do the juvenile detention centers had bribed all the judges. Right. There were 2 judges who are still, one of whom died in federal prison over that.
So this is still state run. Mm-hmm. These units. But they take they make some of the most sadistic people you've ever heard. I mean, guys bragging like, yeah, I'd hit that punk kid. I'm like, you're 38. He's 14. What kind of brag is that?
It's seriously true. What the heck?
I mean, but, then again, you got to have people that want to work in a prison, and it's really not clear that when you're in the prison, who's locked up. I mean, you're both kind of locked up. I mean, you might get to go home, but you're still in a facility that locks up, watches every move you do, watches everything where you go. And
the panopticon.
Yeah. And that's gotta be bad for both people.
It seems like it would be. I know that the Stanford prison experiment has been pretty much debunked because of unethical procedures by the guy who held it. But I still tend to think that a lot of the ideas of the Stanford prison experiment hold up.
Oh, I think it holds up pretty well. I mean, yeah, ethically speaking, it definitely seemed like he was encouraging the one group to start off to push the envelope from the beginning.
Yes,
but we know that the Iowa experiments where they gave the guy the button to zap him, those were not in question, and the guy always turned the button to kill. Like 50% of them turned it to kill when they were given the opportunity to do so, based on the fact that the guy said, "No, we'll take the responsibility." So I think if you have a situation where you could take the responsibility off, those guards would still go out there and beat everyone up.
You see that in a lot of you see that attitude in a lot of the people supporting cops online. Sure. They clearly have fantasies about shooting someone themselves, and so they see they're projecting themselves into the position of the cop or Kyle Rittenhouse, and they're saying, well, if I shot someone, it would be in self-defense, so it has to be self-defense for him too.
Some of that, and I swear to God, I mean, what we're doing now with the way we're selling guns to kids and adults, I'm a gun owner. I'm going to tell you that. I'm a socialist gun owner. I like to shoot paper targets. That's it, right? I don't have any fantasy about, popping my neighbor. But I mean, but all these people that buy everything that's tactical and they're training for there's only one reason you're doing that, because you have some deep laden fantasy of going out there and becoming Rambo and shooting up a whole town.
Yep. And Rambo was the bad guy in the book. Most people forget that. Rambo was the bad guy in First Blood.
Well, yeah. Well, in the movie they had to make him more sympathetic.
In the movie they made him more. Well, see, the problem is you have
in the book he kills everybody.
You're Stallone at that point.
Yeah, but in the book he kills everybody. He doesn't wound.
Well, in the book he's in the book he and the sheriff both end up having these traumatic flashbacks where he thinks he's back in Vietnam and the sheriff thinks he's back in Korea. And this colors everything they do from the moment that he kills one of the deputies and goes on the run to the very end where he kills the sheriff and the army colonel kills Rambo.
But I'm just saying but the book was supposed to be about how both of them were tortured and
it
was much more sophisticated. The movie simplified it and made him far more.
Well, in the book, Sheriff Teasel is an anti-hero who's trying to do the right thing, whereas in the movie he's
the villain.
Yes. And now I think that the cops are the villains is probably the better attitude, but you have to understand the career of Stallone at that time.
Oh yeah,
this is the period where any acting job Stallone took, he had to also get a writing credit to be able to have control over his character. And so Stallone took a lot of liberties with the screenplay to make the Rambo character the hero. Just like he took a lot of liberties with the script of Rhinestone to make his character the centerpiece of the movie instead of Dolly Parton's character.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and then he created that. Well, I mean, I think since we're talking about cops, I mean, probably his best and worst cop film all at the same time, because it shows the utter, cold, calculating.
Copland?
No, not Copland. Cobra.
Oh, yeah. Well, Cobra is based, even though it's set in Philadelphia.
I know.
Cobra so the first thing you have to understand about Cobra is that the book that it's based on was written by a British crime writer.
I know.
In a genre of British pastiches of American crime fiction that were really over the top.
I know.
A lot of those writers were fascists.
But what I'm saying, what I mean by the best part about it is that it's the one that shows the attitude of the cop that comes in and just shoots everything up.
Yes,
and being
that's based on even though that movie is set in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, I can't remember which one.
L.A.
It is set in L.A. Oh, good.
He moved.
For some reason, I thought it was set somewhere else, but in L.A. they have a group that does that.
I know,
and making them the good guys is the big problem with both Cobra and the book it's based on. But it's that British over-the-top crime fiction, which was started by a tremendously famous author who wrote a tremendously popular character called Lemmy Caution.
Yes.
And Lemmy Caution was an American FBI agent who just shot the bejesus out of gangsters left and right. The creator of Lemmy Caution was an Oswald Mosley supporter.
Oh, wow.
So you've got a guy who's picturing an FBI agent as a hero, and his vision for the FBI is very much in the Gestapo line.
Yeah.
But the FBI agent is the hero.
Right. Well, but I mean, but but that's been the depiction of the more violent cop throughout history in America.
Yes, that's true.
I mean, the
So
depiction of Elliot.
there's another line of British crime fiction where the cops are incompetent bumblers who don't have any understanding of how the world actually works.
Is that's like the Sherlock Holmes version?
That's the Sherlock Holmes and to some extent Agatha Christie, even though she was also a fascist.
I know she was a fascist. I knew she was a pharmacist, but not a fascist.
Yes, Agatha Christie was a huge anti-Semite and racist. She was also a Mosley supporter. She thought very well of Mussolini and Hitler. The book 10 Little Indians, which is that's bad enough, was originally entitled 10 Little N-Words.
Oh well, I'm so glad they cleaned it up. Yeah, I never really liked Agatha Christie, so I never really read too much. I knew she was she worked as a pharmacist during World War I, and that was about it.
So, Agatha Christie's best work is the Tommy and Tuppence stories.
You say that Poirot is not her best work?
I don't believe Poirot is her best work because Poirot is still an ex-cop.
He is an ex-cop.
The Tommy and Tuppence characters really sort of ground, even though Christie was a fascist, the Tommy and Tuppence characters really sort of ground that other version of British crime because they set out to be hired adventurers and professional criminals. And yet they end up helping the British government all the time.
Really? No, I didn't. I read maybe one Poirot and I didn't really like it. I was like, well,
I enjoy The Murder of Roger Ackroyd because of the gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
I like The Murder on the Orient Express because just the idea that everybody did it is so appealing.
Well, I think the most appealing part of that book is that everybody did it and Poirot doesn't care because the guy truly was awful.
Yes.
And so he's like, whatever.
Pretty much, yeah.
At the end of the story, it's like, well, whatever. Good for you. I'm going to say he died of natural causes.
The Miss Marple books, though, are really interesting because Miss Marple is portrayed as someone who understands the human potential for evil in a way that the cops don't.
Huh.
And I always found that interesting. In fact, in one of the Miss Marple stories, The Moving Finger, the person who calls in Miss Marple says that they need an expert. And he's an expert in what? And the lady says, an expert in evil.
Okay. I've never read any of the Miss Marple. And I have to say, I have not watched any of the PBS specials either.
I hate to say it, is that there's just, despite her horrible politics, there's just a very interesting honesty about the criminal justice system in Agatha Christie.
I think that's the hard part about art, right? I mean, some really great art can be made by some really terrible people. And you have to acknowledge that. Like, so, I like the Marquis de Sade, but, the guy was a total psycho. But he could write. He could write. You can't bite it. You can't fight it. The guy could write. Now, that doesn't mean that
interesting books on the nature of personal freedom versus state.
I know, but
state authority before his mental health began to break down.
His mental health was always in question. I mean,
so that's the thing, and here's where you have to draw a line between his real mental health issues and the fact that he was a bad person.
Yeah.
Because it becomes too easy. They did the same thing with James Nash in A Beautiful Mind. Mm-hmm. It becomes too easy to blame someone being a bad person on their mental illness. And I think it's important to draw the line. De Sade was not a bad person because he was mentally ill. His mental illness broke down his... I'm not even going to say it. He was a bad person before his mental health began to break down. And his mental health breakdown simply made him less able to function in society. It didn't make him a worse person.
No. I mean...
It made him harm himself more, in fact.
I mean, look at it. I mean, he had a 13-year-old mistress in prison.
So
he was clearly a pedophile.
Yeah, but they were all pedophiles in that era. I mean,
yeah,
the
so
idea.
Many, I know.
You still got Americans who think 13 is an acceptable age for marriage.
Yeah, Matt Walsh.
Christians.
Matt Walsh.
Yes.
Another bad check for the Catholic faith in America. He's like just does it. Ben Shapiro makes Jews look terrible, and his buddy Matt Walsh makes Catholics. So it's a perfect match in heaven, right?
Yeah, we live in a very strange world.
The only person they need next to him is what's that guy? Junior from Liberty University.
Jerry Falwell Jr.
That's right. And they got all three major religions right up there, rocking it. They can't have Muslims because they all hate Muslims, so that's good. There's no Louis Farrakhan there.
Well, they also hate Louis Farrakhan because he's black.
Well, that's a twofer for Louis. Sometimes
there are people who won't. There are people who are so.
Isn't he supposed to be dead though by now? According to his prediction, he knew who killed him and why they killed him, but he didn't know how.
Well, there's a whole thing about how these religious leaders' predictions have a history of not working out. I mean, the guy who founded the Jehovah's Witness said, "No, I was wrong" 10 times, and people still believed him enough to start a religion. I exaggerate the number of times he was wrong a little, but
I still like my favorite religion for
Scientology.
No, that is the one I'm jealous of. Different to be jealous. I mean, that was just so brilliant. A second-rate hack writer.
Someone that other science fiction writers actually thought wasn't very good in an era where science fiction writers mostly loved each other. No one wanted to say any good things about him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they said that he was obnoxious at the meetings too, apparently.
I believe it.
But beyond that, it's the LDS right here from Jamestown, New York. I mean, how can you not love an illiterate guy that tells you that he's been translating ancient hieroglyphics?
So I have to be careful about this area because my wife is Mormon. But
is she?
I do understand exactly what you mean, and it's useful to know that the first publication of the Book of Mormon listed Joseph Smith as the author and was sold as a novel.
I know. In which case, he has beaten what's his name to the punch and was better.
Yeah,
but better. I just got to question that. I mean, I question all faiths. You know, you want to follow around a guy that claims that he is raised from the dead. That's fine. You can do that. I question it.
I consider myself Christian, but when I read the history of the church, I find myself siding with the heretics every time.
I don't know. I don't believe in any of them. I'm an atheist, but there's certain things that are culturally that are bad, right?
Yeah,
and good and everything. And if you have a lot of mass murderers in your culture, like Catholics do, Torquemada, Adolf Hitler, there's got to be something you're doing wrong.
Well,
there's got to be something you're doing really wrong.
Well, I mean, and the thing is you have to remember that. Why did we have the Reformation? Because people who were imperfect themselves could still see that the Catholic Church of their era was this big scam.
That's right. But I'm just saying that you got to have something really wrong when you it's bad enough to scam people. Scamming is bad, right? I mean, I put that up to like your everyday TV evangelist.
But I mean, you have to remember they were selling indulgences to mass murderers in those days. We just don't think of those people as mass murderers now. But I mean, people in the pro-papal party in Florence tried to murder the de Medicis. They killed they killed one guy. They killed one brother and ran the other out of town.
Hey, man.
And it was this big attack on the family. So it wasn't even just a minor thing. It was this big attack on the family fighting in the
Borgias.
The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre.
The Borgias.
The Borgias are interesting. The Borgias are interesting because Cesare Borgia was kind of an Italian nationalist, and he's trying to bring people together, but he's totally dependent on the sponsorship of his father, who's Pope, and all these other Italian leaders see the Pope as a political enemy.
Sure. I mean, that just shows you how political what the Holy Roman See saw itself as this political power. I mean, it had been for years. But what I was getting at is that,
Machiavelli, who was a Republican, thought that Cesare Borgia was this great, important figure.
Well, he was, to a degree. And he probably didn't want to annoy the Pope. He'd already annoyed one prince who was sitting in jail, and that's why he had to write the prince. So I don't think he could write another tomb like that and get out of trouble too fast.
Well, the prince was written after the Cesare Borgia stuff, and he's very effusive in his praise for Cesare. He says, but he also says, but in the end, everything was dependent on his dad being Pope, and when his dad died, it all fell apart.
Oh, well. Which brings the question: how did the Pope have a son in the first place?
That's an important question too, and it's important to understand the history of the Latin word nepos and where the practice of nepotism comes from. So nepos means nephew in Latin, but high church figures would recognize their sons officially by calling them their nephews, and then give them church jobs.
Yep. Like Cardinal.
Which is where nepotism comes from.
That's right, like Cardinal.
Or Pope.
Well, it's kind of hard to give that when you got to get voted. So you got to first get all the half siblings into the bishop. So they be the clergy of cardinals, and then they can vote in their favorite brother.
So the fun fact is that Alexander VI was the second Borgia Pope, and that a few generations later, a descendant of Cesare Borgia's youngest brother would be an actual saint.
I know. He was the one who had to do a lot of praying for the rest of the family and all their other and all their misdeeds. You better start praying, son. Pray now, pray ever, pray hard.
What's really funny though is with the Borgias, you have to. Obviously, there were people who did horrible things, but all these Italian leaders at the time were these horrible people, and their enemies were also horrible people. And I read this book once that's about famous condottieri, and they were all horrible people. Who were, changing sides in wars and fighting fake wars so that they could make money. And the whole reason that Italy was ultimately defeated by the French and the Austrians and the Pope's power was broken and Italy was carved up into territories for other countries was because the mercenaries had been fighting these fake wars for so long that when the French army actually fired live ammunition at them, they were like, oh, fuck, we could get killed. And all ran away.
I don't get paid for that. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of problems. I mean, but again, society will decline, and you start seeing more and more. But then as the society declined, the Pope had to ratchet up the control over people.
But ultimately, the Pope's big political power was all broken by the Italian wars, and while popes were still very influential, they were not a major political power broker in Europe anymore.
Well, no, the 1630s pretty much screwed them. The 30 Years' War, that was it.
Yeah.
They should have gotten Poland in, but they couldn't. They were always reliable to fight for the Pope.
The Poles were the people who saved Austria's ass at the Battle of Vienna.
I bring that up often. I brought that up just recently because they said they're not going to deliver any more weapons to the Ukraine.
Yeah.
Until they get. I'm like, oh, it's Vienna all over again. If you want to be saved, you better pay up.
And but yeah, the greatest hero of the Battle of Vienna was not an Austrian, but the King of Poland.
And Jacek.
Yeah.
His the guy who started the first coffee house. He was a Polish soldier that left him. At least that's the rumor. That's like the myth, right? He starts the first. He finds all these coffee beans, and so he's like, "Yep, there's more money in coffee."
Of course, later on, the Poles really liked Napoleon too.
Well, that's because they had problems.
Yes,
they should probably let Vienna fall because Vienna.
They thought that Napoleon was going to give them a country back. Letting Vienna fall led to Austria taking part in a partition.
That's right.
I mean, not letting Vienna.
One of three partitions.
The first partition, in fact.
Yes, where they took like a big chunk out of the southern half of Poland, including Krakow.
Well, that was the funniest thing, is that the biggest chunk went to Austria because Maria Theresa of Austria made such a big deal about being reluctant to enter the deal that they gave her the most territory in order to get her to commit. And Frederick the Great famously said, "She weeps, but she takes her share."
That's right. So, I mean, that's a big problem, right? I mean, there you go. And that's why we're going to see. I wonder what the Ukraine's going to have to pay the Poles with.
What I wonder about, and this is why I was kind of a little surprised by the Polish support for Ukraine in the beginning.
I'm not.
You have to understand that Lviv was a Polish city before World War II.
Yes, it was.
Western Ukraine was part of the Second Polish Republic before World War II. Western Ukraine was cut off Ukraine and given to the Soviet Union as part of this deal to move Poland west to punish Germany.
Mm-hmm. And 3/4 of Poland and was in the Ukraine and Lithuania during the Lithuanian.
They replaced all the territory that Poland was forced to give to the USSR with territory that Germany was forced to give Poland.
And a little bit of Czechoslovakia too at the time, where they took, which is now the Czech Republic of Slovenia. They took some of that. But my point was, I think they want it back. I wouldn't make a deal with the Poles. I think they want to make it back.
Well, I mean, it's very possible. That's why I was because the thing about competing nationalism is, while there were Polish Nazis and Ukrainian Nazis, the Ukrainian Nazis were the ones who massacred ethnic Poles in Western Ukraine during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And the Polish Nazis were not exactly supportive of that.
No.
And there was a lot of ethnic conflict as a result.
Well, I think there's a big problem, though. I think the Poles are more worried about Russia moving in closer. It's bad enough they're in Belarus.
Yes, the Poles, well, which is, Russia still sees Poland as its most dangerous and powerful enemy over the course of history.
And its favorite stomping ground.
It's like they're still well, no, but I mean, like, average Russians still think Poland might invade again someday.
But we didn't invade in 1921 as a Polish American.
No, it didn't. That was Trotsky's idea.
Yeah.
But
again, that was because
the Poles were the ones who invaded Russia during the famous time of troubles.
Oh, I know.
And that was very formative to the Russian state because it ultimately led to the first Tsar and the establishment of the Romanov family.
Yeah, it's
and ever since then, the Poles have been cast as the villains in the Russian national legend.
Well, yeah. The thing I find most interesting, though, right now about the left is that you see all these memes on social media where the Soviets beat the Nazis. And if you point out to these people that, they were actually really close friends at first. In fact,
well, so this is a myth. This is one of the myths told by anti-communists in order to.
Well, no,
which is not to say that Stalin was a good guy. There are a lot.
But they were pretty. They were pretty close. They had.
So
they each
you have
knew
to understand the two. You have to understand the three phases of Stalin's foreign policy. The first phase was the collective security period.
Mm-hmm.
During the collective security period, Stalin's foreign minister was Maxim Litvinov,
Mm-hmm.
whose wife was British, and who was working very hard to try to bring an anti-fascist treaty to fruition
Mm-hmm.
between the USSR, France, and England. And this did not happen. France and England didn't want anything to do with the USSR because communism.
Oh, yeah.
And so Stalin fired Litvinov and made Molotov foreign minister. And Molotov was a realist who wanted to make some deals with Hitler to keep him off their front porch.
Sure. I'm not saying that. When I say they're good friends, is that they were able to work
and
together.
Then you have the third period of foreign policy, where, of course, as he was always going to do, and as really you have to figure the Soviet Union always expected at some point, maybe not Stalin. Stalin appears to have generally been genuinely be surprised, but
I think Stalin thought he had more time before he was going to get stabbed in the back, and I think Stalin thought he was going to be able to stab Germany in the back first.
Yes.
But that's what I'm getting at. They divvied up Poland together. It was 16 days later that the Russians come in and like, oh, well, we'll help you out. We'll take this half.
Yes, they divvied up Poland together. This is true.
The only weird part about this,
however, but this is sort of the point when I say that only happened, and I'm not trying to justify anything that Stalin did. I'm just trying to point out the forces at work.
Sure.
That happened because the West specifically turned down Stalin's repeated overtures of friendship.
That is true. That is true. I mean, there's no doubt that the Red Scare of the 1920s and early 30s definitely forced Stalin into certain positions. But it didn't help that in 1939 he invaded Finland either.
No, well, so the invasion of Finland is complicated. Stalin's invasion of Finland was a Russian nationalist sort of thing, which is sort of weird for communists, but it was also seen as a revenge for the Finnish Civil War.
Oh, sure.
Because you have to understand that the president of Finland at the time, Mannerheim, had been the commander of the Finnish White Army during the Finnish Civil War and was a guy who massacred communists.
Oh, yeah. There was no
and,
good whites.
And who had an historical relationship with the Nazis, which was one of the reasons and part of the whole deal with the partition of Poland between Stalin and Hitler was that Hitler wouldn't interfere with Stalin wanting revenge against Finland for the Finnish Civil War.
True, but the other thing,
Russian Bolsheviks openly sided with the Finnish communists.
Yeah, there was a whole problem with that. He was a monarchist, Mannerheim, basically. He also didn't speak Finnish. He spoke Swedish
and German.
And German. Because all of the upper class in Finland at that time spoke Swedish because they had lost.
Or German.
There
was a Swedish party and a German party.
But
and Mannerheim became the leader of the German party.
And Sweden lost Finland in 1806 to the Tsar.
Mm-hmm.
And for the next 112 years, they were the principality kind of.
The Grand Duchy of Finland, which was.
Yeah.
And they had their own laws and their own aristocracy and their own autonomous status, but the Tsar was their Grand Duke.
Yes and no. There was always a problem with that. I mean, eventually the Grand Duke could overcome their laws, but
and that was one of the reasons for the Finnish Civil War is that even the Finnish White Army wanted independence from Russia,
and they didn't want to be brought into World War I. And they didn't. They stayed out of it for the most part. They stayed
out of World War I. They had their own civil war instead.
But they wanted.
There were a lot of Finns who fought with the Germans in World War I.
Yes, there were.
Mannerheim did.
Yes, he did. And then when he was done fighting, when they finally collapsed and started the war, the Germans sent them a whole lot of troops to go help out, just like the Germans sent a whole lot of troops to the Ukrainians to help
Yes.
to help fight the Bolsheviks and reinstate
there was the remains of the German army was still headquartered in Eastern Army was still headquartered in Ukraine when the first fighting in Ukraine broke out between the Red Army and the White Army. The Germans sided with the Ukrainian nationalists and kicked both the Red Army and the White Army out for a little time. And that's where you have the short-lived Ukrainian People's Republic.
That's right. And then you have the other, and the Germans were still big in Poland, and they helped the Polish nationalists gain. That was until they got Eastern Prussia, and then they got upset about that. When they thought that East Prussia was going to be okay.
Well, West Prussia was Frederick the Great's reason for wanting Poland partitioned the first time was just that he wanted West Prussia so that East Prussia would be connected to the Margravate of Brandenburg.
That's right.
Because it's important to understand that Prussia was not the state. Brandenburg was the state. Mm-hmm. Prussia was the kingdom given to the Margrave of Brandenburg as a reward, and so that he could now call himself king. And Frederick the Great wanted to make Prussia a state.
That's right, he did.
And annexing West Prussia and connecting East Prussia to the Brandenburg territories was his only goal in the partition of Poland.
That was his only goal.
He took the least amount of land of any of the three.
He did, but he also took the best land. He took
of course. Well, that was the rich. But at the same time, he also let the rich merchants in the big cities govern themselves.
And it didn't hurt that he took a big part of the old Hessianic League with it.
It's true.
And he wanted all those merchants, and he wanted that commerce.
It's true.
But what I was getting at is just that
focused on commerce. He wanted to grow his economy.
What I was just getting is that Germany and Poland, they're all interrelated. They've all been trying to stomp out one another. And we're going down
and working together to stomp out communism.
Sometimes
until World War II.
Yeah.
But then again, after World War II, there were a lot of Eastern European Nazis who ended up in pro-democratic political parties.
True. But the best part about like Finland is that all of their Nazis became all of our Nazis. Because they weren't welcome in Finland after the inconvenient truth was that the continuation war from 41 to 44, right? They quick turned sides on the Nazis and kicked them all out.
Well, the Russians made a deal at the end
so that they don't invade.
The Finns lost the continuation war. Part of the treaty was that they had to switch sides and fight with the Allies against the Nazis.
And that kicked all the Nazis out. But where did they all show up? They all showed up on the door of the U.S. Literally, I mean.
Oh, and the U.S. and the British settled a large number of Ukrainian Nazis. The U.S. in Queens. Mm-hmm. And the British in Calgary.
And we took all these Nazis and we put them in, just like Cop City, we put them into little training centers.
The granddaughter of one of those Ukrainian Nazis is a very strongly pro-Ukrainian nationalist deputy prime minister of Canada now.
Well, I'm just saying that it's kind of funny, right? All those Nazis got into the CIA and they all started to train our special forces and they all went to like these.
So here's the big question. And this is the part that's always sort of, why were they working so hard to recruit the losers?
Well,
one of the things that I've always found hilarious about this is these are the guys you beat. Why do you want their expertise?
Because it turns out they weren't really all that wrong. They just couldn't beat anybody by themselves, right? Or the whole world, right?
Mm-hmm. Because Germany couldn't stand up to the rest of Europe all by itself, essentially.
Yeah, but their tactics were good, and we wanted them.
Mm-hmm.
So we took all their tank commanders.
Well, we specifically wanted all their
wonder weapons. We took all their
Well,
scientists.
we wanted their Gestapo because we wanted to be able to fight the Cold War.
Yeah, and that
And they thought, and the U.S. saw these German intelligence figures as natural allies against the USSR because they had fought the USSR in World War II.
True. And what I was getting at is that
which was a very quick switch, because the OSS was telling Truman in the 1940s, you really should be nicer to this Ho Chi Minh guy and promise independence to Vietnam, because he's on our side right now, and he would happily stay on our side if we just give him what he wants.
Well, there's a big fight. There was also a big fight over who to back in China, Mao or Chiang Kai-shek, and some OSS thought Mao was the better deal. He was going to win no matter what.
Mao was the one. The way that they put it is that, and this was the thing, is the whole OSS rationale in World War II was fight the Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very good rationale. And if your rationale is fight the Nazis, then you see communist anti-fascists as more of potential allies than potential enemies. One of the things that OSS people kept telling Truman after World War II is Mao is the one who actually fought the Japanese.
Yeah. But what I was getting at is that we've embedded this whole Nazi philosophy, not only just to the CIA and it's filtered down over time into police organizations, FBI. I mean,
well, it really doesn't help that the Dulles brothers were pro-Nazi just prior to World War II, and then Eisenhower put them right smack dab in the middle of his foreign policy establishment.
No. And, we got trained by them, and now we're just returning the favor with all these cop cities that are, the Gestapo training centers.
Yes.
I mean, we're one step away from that kind of political power.
Petros Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, joined the Ukrainian army and is now openly wearing his Nazi insignia. Now,
Azov?
The thing, remember, the Ukrainian army uses lots of Nazi symbolism even beyond just Azov. The regular Ukrainian army has adopted the Wolf's Angel.
Oh, they have? I didn't know they adopted it. I thought that was only Azov. I know it's become really popular on the internet, and they're adopting everything and anything. I mean, but that's not weird, I mean, like 2 years ago, the U.S. Army put up a picture of Michael Whitman on D-Day as if. I mean, the greatest Nazi tank ace potentially ever. They stick up there like today is his day. I'm like, well, he actually dies like a month after the invasion, but okay. And he was a diehard in the wool Nazi.
I mean, it's the pioneer. This is just so ironic. The guy who wrote the book that Guderian used to create the Nazi tank corps was Charles de Gaulle.
Yes.
It's just one of the most fun facts of World War II. Charles de Gaulle wrote the book on how to use tanks the way the Germans used tanks.
Achtunpanzer, Hans Guderian, 37, I think he wrote it in. Well, everyone was moving towards that after World War I. Everyone saw the potential. I mean, there's a whole lot of military writing between World War I and World War II, where there's a lot of where you have these young people who see the potential of technology, and you have these old guard who are just like cavalry is still the most important thing. John French, who was for a little while commander of the British Expeditionary Force in World War I, and more importantly was a big hero of the Second Boer War. John French believed that lance charges on horseback were the most effective way to win a battle in World War I, and was disabused of that very harshly. And yet we were still using those tactics in the American and British victories at the very end of the war. The Americans who won the Battle of San Miguel won it with a cavalry charge. Yeah. Yeah, cavalry was still
And so,
important.
so between World War I and World War II, you've got this argument, and in the West, the old guard won, and their military was behind the German military early on, whereas the Germans were the Nazis were reading all these books by the young officers in the West.
Yeah, I mean, there was a whole lot of stuff going on at that time period. I mean, during World War I, some of the last battles, the U.S. actually perfected what would later become Blitzkrieg. We expect the troops, the air power all at once. We just didn't have enough.
Yeah, Blitzkrieg was always kind of a myth too, because Hitler's army during the invasion of Poland was still mostly horse-powered.
Well, but he had a great propaganda.
Oh, certainly.
And that goes on. And what I was just getting at is that that Nazi influence, right, has been with our police forces for a long time, and it's been cross. Sometimes we influence them.
The New Jersey State Police uniform is allegedly based on a uniform worn by Namibian colonial police when Germany ran the country.
I know. I saw it. I'm like, yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
And they had the Namibian mass genocide of 1904,
exactly.
with at least 2 million dead.
Plus, which nobody ever talks about, the 900 Namibian-born Germans who were killed in the Holocaust.
That's right. I mean, but the Boer War, the concentration camp idea grows out of that, which was grown out of our idea of creating reservations. Both the English and the Germans copy that. I'm like, hey, that's a great idea. You concentrate them all together, then you can just starve them out. So, I mean, it's going to be hard. You got to fight all these problems, and you got to look hard at what is this cop city really about? And it's an invasion. It's a military invasion of a city. It has no other purpose. It's just like if we put a base, when we put a base in a country, that's an invasion.
The thing is, when the British put the Boers in concentration camps, that may have been the only time that was ever actually justified, because the Boers had left British South Africa in the first place because they wanted to keep slavery, and the British Empire had just abolished it.
Well,
and that was what started the Great Trek. The Voortrekkers went to what became Orange and Natal because they wanted to keep their slaves.
Yeah, there's no justifying the Boers. I mean, and their racial problems. I mean, they were racist.
And the British weren't any better, of course, but
they were horrible human beings for the most part.
It's hard, but it's just like,
But I was just saying that even as terrible as they are, we still found ways to be just as terrible in a different vein.
The British found ways to be worse to them than they were to.
And
others.
I'm not justifying the Boers. I mean, although
I know
the Second Boer War starts on my birthday.
Well, one thing that it doesn't get told, one story that doesn't get told very often, is how the strategic hamlets of Vietnam were based on Malaysian concentration camps.
That's right.
We're going to deliberately concentrate our allies here so we can defend them more easily, even if we have to kill them all to get them there.
I mean, we've just been doing this for a long time, and every time you see these things, you have to realize that these cop cities are an invasion of a city by a military power. That's the only way to look at it.
Well, our cities are occupied by a paramilitary Nazi force.
And they don't just not want Nazis. They want to recruit from Nazis, and they want to make them better at it.
They use political blackmail and extortion on allegedly anti-cop politicians to make them pro-cop.
True.
It is an open secret that the arrest of what's his name, Bill de Blasio's daughter by the NYPD and the release of her mugshot, that was a deliberate threat. Hey, we got your daughter. She's one of these Black Lives Matter people, and we're going to do bad things to her.
That was definitely a threat.
Yes.
Extortion. all of that.
And when you see that, that makes you wonder, so how many other mayors have had their families threatened by cops in more subtle ways?
Well, what happened in Minnesota?
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota, they voted that, and now they're building more and more cops. They're hiring more cops in Minneapolis.
Well, Tim Walz is a big Hillary Clinton, Michael Bloomberg kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the mayors for Bloomberg during the 2020 primaries.
I mean, the only difference between Bloomberg and the Nazis was that he didn't force black people to have like some kind of symbol on their coat.
Yeah.
Before he.
Well, but I mean, the reason that.
And you don't need to.
The reason that Jews had to wear specific symbols,
because you can't tell them.
Jews looked like other Germans.
Yeah, that's right.
That's one of the really heinous things about the Holocaust is if you read Maus,
mm-hmm.
when the author's father is talking about the concentration camps, and one of the prisoners, when he first got to the concentration camp, is saying, "No, I'm a German. I'm not Jewish. I'm a German." And it might have been true.
Yeah. But but you can't read Maus now in Florida because that's banned.
I know. And but that's just because they couldn't, you had to mark people because they looked like everyone else. Whereas with black people, you don't have to mark them because you can recognize them.
That was what I was getting at, is that they already had a mark, one that they could never get rid of and they could never deny, and he was fine. And then racial profiling is still done. Everyone says it's not, but it is.
Well, it is the undergirding of policing in many ways. The second most famous cop in the country during the early Cold War was the police chief of Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
He invented the sort of what we think of as modern policing, and it was all built around racial profiling. There's an episode, so much so that there's an episode of Dragnet that is devoted to convincing young black people that they should cooperate with cops racially profiling them, because this is the best way to catch the real bad guys.
For your own good, because there's so many bad guys that look like you. We have to profile you all. We can't but we don't mean it in a bad way. No.
Yeah, it's just that was one of the most heinous episodes of Dragnet ever.
I think what's her name brought that up. Not Dragnet, but the idea that it's okay. Wasn't it the Young Turks have been pushing for racial profiling of poor people this time?
Well, yeah. The Young Turks went out, they became Rick Caruso supporters. And Rick Caruso was a MAGA Republican who was suddenly running for mayor of Los Angeles as a Democrat, because you have to be a Democrat to get elected in Los Angeles now.
Doesn't mean much.
It doesn't mean much. There's not a huge difference between the last Republican administration of Los Angeles, Richard Riordan, and the Democrats who have come after him.
I mean, and you see that, you see so-called left groups supporting this cop city, or not saying anything about it at all. Maybe the silence is even more interesting.
If nobody ever talks about Cop City, that's a little bit of a problem.
You got guys like Max Blumenthal, who doesn't say much about it. He's more worried.
I don't know. To be fair to Max, as much as I don't like to be fair to Max, I don't know whether he talks about it much at all or not. I don't pay much attention to Max.
I checked recently.
Yeah, I would. I occasionally check what Max and Anya are talking about. But
I checked, and it seemed to me that they were they were excited about promoting their book that Tucker Carlson had just signed off on and helped to get published. And there was nothing about Cop City or anything like this.
I remember
There's nothing in MSNBC about Cop City, CBS, Fox, CNN.
MSNBC sort of talked about Cop City a little bit.
A couple of months ago, when the kid was shot, that's when they talked about it. That was almost a year ago.
Yeah. That's
true. Now it's nonstop Trump.
Yeah, that's true. It is nonstop Trump. I remember the sudden switch too, back in 2016, when Rachel Maddow, who had been winning awards from Project Censored every year, suddenly stops her really excellent Flint coverage and pivots to all Trump all the time.
Well, the problem with the Flint coverage was that it was going to rain poorly on
Democrats during the election.
And Clinton, and I mean, if she kept on reporting that, then Clinton couldn't accept that gold badge of honor for stamp of approval that Obama was going to give her, because now he's tainted by Flint, and there you go. And what do you get? You end up with this: Trump nonstop, P-tape conspiracies, which probably do exist, but I mean, what the hell does it matter?
Well, and then 2022, 2021. No, it was, can't remember what it was, 2021 or 2022. The attorney general elected in Michigan to prosecute the Flint Republicans basically decided not to prosecute because the governor were worried about the state being liable.
Dismisses the whole issue because that they didn't know who was going to actually finally pay for the problem.
Well, even beyond that, they didn't want the state to be sued over what these people did.
Well, right, but I mean, that was the big issue was who's going to actually end up having to pay this big fine when it gets cleaned up. I mean, obviously, if they're acting in the state was still liable. Those people could go to jail, but someone was going to still have to clean up the Flint River, and they had no intention of cleaning up the Flint River. And now he's, I mean, I'm surprised that Flint doesn't have a cop city coming to it.
Give them time.
I mean, it's a hotbed. It's a problem area. It's got all the only thing is it doesn't have is enough of a middle class to really support it. So,
well, horror stories about Flint and Detroit are why you see so many Confederate flags in Michigan, which is just sick. Is there anything sicker than Confederate flags in the home state of the Iron Brigade?
There is. That's when they see this Confederate flag next to a Nazi flag.
It's true. That's true. But I mean, they mean the same thing.
They do.
In Germany, Alternative for Deutschland flies Confederate flags as a code for the Nazi flag because Nazi iconography is illegal. Iconography is illegal in Germany.
So is the Nazi salute, and so is everything else.
So they use the Confederate flag as a code.
That's right. They also use Confederate phrases to, like our Nazis use the 14 words and all that other nonsense they've created, which makes me think again, right? I mean,
and this anti-vax stuff and this cult of health ties back into German New Medicine, which is the idea that some dude in Berlin who had supported the Nazis during World War II and wanted to be a chiropractor after World War II, that medical science is a Jewish trick.
I don't trust chiropractic.
Well, you shouldn't.
It's from Iowa, and apparently the founder was just nuts.
Well, so chiropractic comes out of the whole German New Medicine thing, along with naturopathy.
Yeah.
Ultimately, because it's this is what you do instead of taking these horrible chemicals.
That's right. And that's not, I mean, some chemicals are bad, don't they?
It's true, but medicine is not a trick by a marginalized ethnic group either.
No, it's not. I mean, every time I read that and you see all those stupid memes like, I'm smarter than the vaccine, you guys are sheep, I'm thinking to myself, you're just an idiot.
Or worse, you actually are associated with some of the because there used to be open fascists in what was then the Green Movement. It wasn't a party yet; it was the Green Movement.
Eco-fascists,
yes, who professed what was called deep ecology, and the founders of deep ecology were the Rachel Carsons and Paul. I'm trying to remember his last name.
What was that? The Georgia. What were they called? The Georgia Stones, the ones that were standing stones, like the.
I know Stone Mountain.
Stone Mountain. That's the one where they got the Confederates carved in. The Georgia Stones were the ones that was.
Though they fired him because he was being corrupt about the production.
Yeah,
the artist who designed it was the sculptor.
Yeah, I know.
The sculptor who carved Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, no, it's Borglum.
Yeah.
Borglum was in the KKK. That's not.
Yes,
that's not
Borglum was a KKK member.
But no, the Georgia Standing Stones. That's what they are. Remember, they're the ones that say, like population only 500,000.
Yeah.
They've always been linked to eco-fascists. And that was the ones that were recently blown up by some nut job Trumper who thought they were Satanists.
With the population bomb, Paul Ehrlich. That's the name I was trying to remember.
Paul Ehrlich. 1973.
Paul Ehrlich and Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring, and several other people whose names are less recognizable, founded what was then called Zero Population Growth, and now has a very different name because people realized, there's something a little genocidal sounding about zero population growth.
Well, they were also getting on. They were also working with another group that showed up, who I think has really good ideas in certain areas. The Steady State Economics Movement by Herman Daly, and they proposed they didn't propose a zero population growth, but they thought that population was a big
sure. But what we have found is that population pretty much corrects itself if you make people's lifestyles better.
Sure, yeah, most definitely. That's the one thing but they didn't have that. I mean, I think Herman Daly's.
But Paul Ehrlich didn't want to make anybody's lifestyles better. He just wanted to let people die.
He did have some.
These were the people who during the 80s got in the big argument with Murray Bookchin because they went on TV. The Project Earth people went on TV and were talking about the Ethiopian famine and saying, no, we shouldn't send aid. We should let nature take its course.
Yeah,
it's not a natural famine, you doofus.
Even if it were a natural famine, you still shouldn't not do anything.
Yeah. But they literally said, let nature take its course right there on television in front of the country.
They did. But, but that whole population thing goes back even further. I mean, John Maynard Keynes talks about it in his short letter to the people about the future.
Malthus wrote a lot about population.
Malthus was worried that, his cushy life was going to be screwed because poor people were going to steal all his stuff.
Yeah, well. And he was a preacher, so why did he have that much stuff in the first place?
Because the good Lord loved him.
Clearly.
And he married and it didn't hurt that he married into a pretty wealthy family.
Sure. That makes a difference too. But it's just, he's a clergyman. You're not supposed to be an asshole. I mean, obviously so many are, but
it helps. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt.
It's sadly true.
If you want to move up in the ranks of the clergy, it seems that might be the best way, because the guy who's gives all his stuff away and actually follows the thing.
The liberation theology bishop got murdered, and the one who made accommodations with the Argentine government is Pope.
That's right. Well, I didn't say we'd go that far. I said they could have a small lunch. Come on now. So what I was getting at is that, you have all that in, and these people, again, it feeds back to the idea that sooner or later they see the big population growth, and then they get all scared, and they're like, well, we got to have cops because we're sure as hell not going to feed all of them.
Police violence is also seen as a way to control certain populations.
Oh, yeah, and we're not going to feed them. And as you were saying, what is it, Colorado? Sudden death by police is considered.
Sudden death, sudden in custody death syndrome.
I mean, if that doesn't sound like that was created by somebody's union rep lawyer,
it is directly connected with the debunked and completely racist idea of what is it they call it now? I hate it when my brain does that.
All I could think of was SIDS.
No, it's I need to get a dress for church. Okay, go ahead. It's I hate it when I can't remember. It's excited. I'm just gone again. But cops basically made up this this fake medical condition to explain why some people resist arrest. And then cops have to be violent with them.
Oh, there's well, you know what that one was based on, right? Drapetomania, that first one.
Yes.
It was literally like the wording from, and everyone made fun of it because they're like, God, you just took drapetomania, which was debunked in the 1840s, and said that was what causes.
You mean the idea that people don't want to be slaves is a mental health problem? I mean, I don't buy that.
Hey man, he was a god down in Louisiana, that doctor.
Yeah, well,
did you ever see that that faux documentary CSA?
CSI? Oh no,
CSA.
I haven't seen CSA. No.
You can find it on YouTube. It's a documentary. What if the Confederate States of America? It was made by a black filmmaker.
Yeah,
and it just shows how really racist America has been.
There was an indie comic in the 1980s called Captain Confederacy, which posited a world in which the Confederacy won the Civil War, and there was a United States and a Confederate States. And while the Confederate States had abolished slavery, they still had a very strong Jim Crow system in place. And they created a fake supervillain and a fake superhero. The fake supervillain was, of course, black. And the fake superhero was, of course, white. And the government then set up this secret government agency to stage these fake fights between the fake supervillain and the fake superhero. And eventually the fake supervillain is so angry at pretending to be a stereotype for a racist government that he actually becomes a supervillain.
Oh, I've never heard of that one.
I know that a big thing.
I know that you'd be surprised at how many books have been written about the Confederates winning. The list is like huge. And the oddest thing I've ever found is that there's an awful lot of Southern Jewish authors that write these.
Well,
there's a lot of fans of Benjamin P. Judah, I guess.
S.M. Sterling. S.M. Sterling wrote the Draka series. The first book of which is Marching Through Georgia. Marching Through Georgia is set in Soviet Georgia during World War II.
Oh.
The bad guys are the Draka, who are this sort of group that exists, this country in South America where all the ex-Confederates went, basically. And its whole economy is built on slavery.
So you're saying that you realize that basically they just Confederacies and Nazis, same thing, moved to Argentina.
This is the whole thing. You have these villains who are ex-Confederates and are portrayed as so horrific. And this is the worst part of this book. They are portrayed as so horrific that the Nazis look like the good guys in comparison. That's not a good book to write.
No, it's not. But it might be true. I mean, if you think about it, the Southern slave states had control of slaves for what?
Well, Hitler, a whole lot of Hitler's stuff came directly from the Jim Crow policies of the post-slave South. So it's absolutely American slave owners' ideas are genocidal.
But even so, they even thought that we were too excessive with that one and done thing. You know, I mean, they were like, well, you got to be at least 3/4 Jewish to be a problem. If you're only a quarter Jewish, you're not. Americans were like, nope, quarter black, eighth black, back of the bus. Because that's how extreme we were. And people
the woman who ends up marrying both of the protagonists of John Jake's North and South is socially ostracized because she's 1/8 black.
That's right. The octoroons. I mean, how do you even have a phrase for it? I mean, we even have a phrase for it. And that's why they picked Plessy to go against Ferguson, because he was white enough to make a real complaint.
He was a Creole, and in Louisiana there was an illusion still. It had been broken down legally in a lot of ways, but there was still an illusion among the Creole community that they were white too.
That's right, but they weren't. And
no,
that's what they wanted to fight, and that's why they picked him over. They had much better cases with black people that they avoided, and they picked that one because they felt, well, this guy looks white.
This guy's white enough that he'll have sympathy with a white jury.
Supreme Court said no.
Yeah.
and that's what we're turning back to. We're turning back to the vigilante mob system.
Pretty much. And it's the wrong kind of vigilante mob system. I would much rather see vigilance committees like the Boston Vigilance Committee that gave money to John Brown.
That would be good.
Why can't we have the right kind of vigilantes?
Well, probably because vigilantes, right, see themselves as being rich one day and really don't like the idea that someone's taking their means of getting rich away from them.
But
this seems to be
I have a question for you, because this is, I hate to sound like I'm copying the decadence people, but does it seem like our ruling class is really inferior in some ways to past generations' ruling classes? I mean, probably. The thing you have to remember is that all these Boston Vigilance Committee guys were part of Boston society. They were highly respected teachers and professors and landowners who got together and said, runaway slaves shouldn't be hunted.
Yeah, but here's the question, right? If we dig deep enough, we're going to find that, they might not have wanted runaway slaves hunted, but they also might not want a runaway slave to be their neighbor. And that was the problem. These were
the folks who hung out with Frederick Douglass. And
so they were probably
big on social equality.
They were the better abolitionists, because there was a ton of abolitionists who just didn't want to, with the not in my backyard kind of guys.
Well, they were different. The people who were against slavery for NIMBY reasons were never really part of the abolition movement in that way.
No, they weren't. But I'm saying, they did make their voices known, and they did.
Oh, sure. When Oregon was originally founded, they outlawed slavery, but they also made it illegal for black people to move there.
Yeah, well, I don't know how you do that one. I don't know how that.
They made it illegal. We can't.
I know, but I don't know how you do that and have the 14th Amendment.
Well, that was before the 14th Amendment. When Oregon became a state, there was still slavery in the South. So one of Oregon's two first senators was from South Carolina and owned slaves that he wasn't even supposed to have in the territory, and was one of the people who wrote the "No Black People and No Slavery in Oregon" rule. But I don't know if he sent his slaves out of the state.
Probably did. Back to the farm. They finished their job, and then he signed the paper and work. See, all work is done. No, I mean, and that's what we're heading back. I think that we have a big problem with our aristocracy.
But I mean, where are the class traders who fund Frederick Douglass and John Brown now?
Well, they're not around too much.
I noticed that.
I mean, we got some what we might call marginal class traders, like we're seeing at the strike with the SAG and WAG strike, or WGA. Mm-hmm. They say they're going to support certain classes.
Fran Drescher has made a lot of very socialist, pro-working class speeches.
She has. But let's wait until it really comes. Let's wait till it really comes down to it, and they say, well, you're not going to be making $44 million on the front end, and you're not going to be making $80 million on the back end of that picture anymore. Let's see how many of these, high-end actors say, well, screw it, get out the CGI and just double just make fake extras in this scene. and do all, I mean, do we really need a real?
See, there's the thing is that anything, and this is something SAG has always been fairly good at. Anything that can be done to screw over someone who isn't a big star can be done to a big star too.
Oh, we can.
And there is a history of movie studios and movers and shakers in Hollywood ruining people's careers.
Oh, I don't disagree.
So movie stars have, well, I certainly don't want to pretend that movie stars are full of class, that Hollywood is full of class consciousness. Movie stars do seem to understand that anything can be done that can be done to other actors can be done to them too.
Well, right, it can be. But,
But it's also worth noting that Fran Drescher is not someone who works a lot anymore, so it's fairly safe for her to
make
these speeches.
I mean, her big job now is in administration of SAG. That's her big.
Ronald Reagan was a SAG president once, and he ran a Hollywood strike once, and we still didn't want him as president.
He also, that must have been before his GE days.
So this is the gross thing, is that basically Ronald Reagan started working with GE and became a Republican to impress Nancy's family.
Mm-hmm.
Because they wanted a rich Republican son-in-law and not a New Deal Democrat who worked in Hollywood.
What?
We should probably wind down anyway.
Okay.
It's been 2.5 hours.
Well, I gotta go.
Yes. I want to thank you for joining me.
No
I
problem.
want to thank everyone else for watching. And I hope everybody has a great rest of the weekend, and we'll tweet at you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. It's been fun.